Good evening, everyone. I'm Alexia Hudson Ward, Associate Director of Research, Learning, and Strategic Partnerships for the MIT Libraries. On behalf of our director, Chris Berg, I welcome you to our hybrid MIT Reads 2024 event for the spring. Before I begin, everyone, I'm going to ask you for a favor, and that is that you place any device that rings, barks, chimes, chirps, or will otherwise make disturbing noises during tonight's event on vibrate or silent mode. Our event tonight will be recorded and posted for future viewing. Thanks and gratitude are extended to the MIT Libraries coordinating team for tonight's event. Sylvia Figuera Ortiz, Aya Fujitsa Ross, Kathy Paris, Julia Lanigan, Eliza Martin, along with our recent library retiree, Nina Davis Millis, for all of your hard work in making this event successful. Thanks to our sponsors in comparative media studies and writing, rhetoric, and personal communication for their partnership as well. The evening's flow of events are as follows. After introductions from me, we will have a presentation from our speakers, and then we'll move into a dialogue with the speaker and our moderator. After the dialogue, the floor, both virtually and in person, will be open to your questions. At the conclusion of our event this evening, we invite you, those who are attending in person, to join us for a book signing. Many thanks to our colleagues at the MIT Press for their helping with this, and a light dinner hosted by the libraries. Now on to the introductions of tonight's speakers and moderator. This evening's moderator is Louise Harrison LaPera, who has taught writing at MIT since 2002. She currently teaches contemporary rhetoric and autobiographical writing courses in the Writing, Rhetoric, and Personal Communication program, and also partners with other MIT instructors as a communication intensive in the humanities, arts, and social sciences writing advisor. Louise is also a co-editor of Angles, a collection of the best pieces of introductory writing courses at MIT. She holds a bachelor's in American Studies and English from the University of Hull in the UK, and a master's in English from Boston University, where she also completed PhD coursework in literature. This semester's autobiographical course is reading our MIT Reads featured work. Thank you, Louise, for serving as our moderator. We are also pleased to welcome Dr. John Urschel and Louisa Thomas, who will discuss their New York Times best-selling book, Mind and Matter, A Life in Math and Football. Dr. Urschel is an assistant professor of mathematics at MIT and a former offensive lineman for the Baltimore Ravens, where he was selected in the 5th round of the 2014 NFL Draft and played 3 seasons for the franchise. Yet his love of mathematics remained in his heart throughout his entire career as an NFL player. And he balanced his bifurcated life of pursuing a doctorate in mathematics here at MIT while also playing professionally. His story draws us closer to understanding how reason, emotion, and the mind and body always work together. Dr. Urschel holds a bachelor and master's degree in mathematics from Penn State University. And in 2013, he won the Sullivan Award for being the most outstanding amateur athlete in the United States and the Campbell Trophy for being the nation's top scholar athlete in college football. Louisa Thomas is the author of Louisa, The Extraordinary Life of Mrs. Adams, a biography of the former First Lady Louisa Catherine Adams, and Conscious, 2 Soldiers, 2 Pacifists, 1 Family, a test of wills and faith in World War I about her great-grandfather, Norman Thomas, and his 3 brothers. She is the former editor and writer of ESPN's Grantland and a New Yorker contributor. Her writings have also appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, Vogue, several Best American sports writing anthologies, and other places. She earned a bachelor's degree from Harvard University and served as a visiting lecturer in English. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Urschel and Louisa to our podium.
All right, thank you. First off, I want to say thank you for coming. Hopefully, there we go. And and hopefully this is enjoyable and pretty fun night. I have you for about 10 or 15 minutes before we get into the discussion. And I thought it could be a good time to talk a little bit about the book, talk about what motivated it, and then to read a little excerpt for you from the book. So to start at the beginning is to say that this book largely is an autobiography of what I hope is probably the first third of my life, not the first half, and also probably hopefully not the first quarter. And it really focuses on my dual passions of mathematics and sport, in particular American football, and how these things grew and progressed together from the time when I was a very little kid all the way to when I was a professional football player in the NFL, while simultaneously working on my PhD here at MIT Math, just in Building 2 down the hall. So it starts very, very early, all the way from when I'm very, very little. Stories of me, my mother, who is actually in the back watching our two kids, and my grandmother. Stories about loving math from a young age. Stories about when I get a little bit older, and in high school I start to play football and I find the second passion. Stories of being a Division I football player at Penn State while simultaneously trying to be a math major, something that if you aren't a student athlete and you don't know any student athletes is surprisingly difficult. Playing Division I college sports is essentially like having a second full-time job. Friendships made along the way. These are my two parents. And then 3 years in the NFL, all while sort of realizing and deciding that, no, I love math so much that it's time for me to go back to school and starting my PhD here at MIT. And in particular, this is me holding a football. I want this to be noted that I did get to touch the football once. Okay. Yeah. And the last thing I want to talk about for this book before I read, well, the excerpt that I read will be the preface. I think it's no better place to start, is to talk about why we wrote this book. And really the motivation for writing this book came at a time where I'm a professional football player, I'm a mathematician at MIT, and good or bad, I had a level of visibility and a level of attention and a level of credibility with young people all across this country that your top mathematicians just did not have, fair or unfair. And so I found myself often being asked to go talk to kids in classrooms, to Zoom with classrooms, to do extracurricular activities around getting young people excited about math. And in many ways, I think I had a very legitimate responsibility to do this, to be in the position that I was in, to have the sort of platform that I had, to really push the importance of math and how beautiful math is, and push that towards a young audience. And in fact, here's just another picture, me in some classroom, I don't know. In fact, that is actually what motivated this book. So Louisa, my wife, and I, we actually, we weren't planning to write a memoir. It was actually the most interesting thing. We wanted to write a math book. So we got together and we sort of thought, you know, we should really do something to show young people, you know, just how beautiful and amazing math can be and share the joy of math. And so our plan was, we are going to write a popular math book. And we worked quite hard on it. We had a draft, we had a proposal. We sent the proposal in, and Penguin Press, the publisher of this book, they said, John, Louisa, we love what you sent in, but why is there no football in it? You know, why only talk about math? To only talk about one aspect of your life would be doing a disservice to yourself and to the readers. And Penguin Press correctly argued that actually talking about the early part of your life in its entirety, including football and all aspects of it, would actually be more effective in introducing lots of young people to the very cool mathematics that's in this book than if we actually made this a purely math book. And so this is how this book was born. And, well, though it's not in this book, I am now a first-year assistant professor back here at MIT, and so, yes, thanks. And so I can say it feels like a deep privilege to be able to be with you all, to be back here at MIT. I was away for a few years, and to be able to talk about my journey in football and mathematics, which had a lot to do with my time at MIT. And so with that, I'll read you the preface, and then we can continue to our main event of the night. I am a mathematician, a PhD candidate at MIT. I am also a former professional football player, a retired offensive lineman for the Baltimore Ravens. Many people see me as a walking contradiction. They think that the pursuit of excellence in football makes the pursuit of excellence in mathematics impossible. They think that a strong interest in one makes a strong interest in the other improbable. People tend to think in binaries, right and wrong, black and white, mind and body, math and football. I don't spend a lot of time wondering about the ways in which I'm an anomaly. My life is the only one I know. It's normal to me. We all have multiple and sometimes diverging identities. In different ways, math and football are both essential to me. I'm sometimes asked about the connection between math and football. People want to know what edge being good at math gives me on the field. I know what they want to hear, and I usually give it to them. I talk about basic physics, intelligence, and problem solving. But the truth is, football and math are disjoint in my experience. When the ball is snapped, I'm not thinking about vectors and forces. I'm not really thinking about much of anything. I'm simply moving. Math gives me a way of making sense of the world. It helps me see past the confusion of everyday life and glimpse the underlying structures of the universe. It reveals the properties of shapes and the prevalence of patterns. It describes the relationships between things. I'm drawn to the rigor and the clarity of mathematics, and to the elegance and simplicity of solutions to even the most complex problem. I know no other feeling like the satisfaction of discovery. I still feel that same sense of wonder and curiosity when I try to prove a theorem that I felt when I did logic and math puzzles as a kid. Football put me in contact with something messier, something elemental and deep inside me. It strengthened not only my body, but also my confidence and my will. Football was a game, and I had a lot of fun playing it. but it was also a test for me. I look like a football player, maybe not so much anymore, but I'm 6'3", with broad shoulders and pretty big hands and feet. But I never had as much raw athletic potential as a lot of the guys I played with and against. I relied on my intensity, my competitiveness, and my desire. This memoir proceeds on alternating parallel tracks. One is the story of my life in mathematics. It begins when I was a toddler, the age that my mother started buying me puzzle books and workbooks and started playing games with me, encouraging my mathematical creativity and reasoning. If I am truly an outlier, it is because of her, a single mother who loved math but was discouraged from it, who wanted me never to feel that any door was closed to me. For me, math is a great intellectual pursuit, though it calls upon my spirit too. It is a story of moving between the ideal, abstract world and the reality that we live in. A story of private investigation and also collaboration. It explores not only my experience of encountering and learning mathematical concepts, from infinity to graph theory to the uncertainty principle, but also learning how to think. The other story of my life is football, from the time I saw a picture of my father in football pads. It's the story of how I strengthened my body and my will, how I learned to fail and learned from failing. It focuses on my experiences on the field, but is also a story of how I learned to make friends and to find my place in a social world. My football career began a decade or so after I saw that picture of my father at Canisius High School in Buffalo, New York, and continued at Penn State during years when the team's very existence was threatened by scandal. Finally, I made my way to the Baltimore Ravens in the NFL, where I learned to navigate a different kind of landscape and faced a final difficult test, determining when to walk away. Those two stories, as different as they are, converge in me. Thank you. Thank you. Which would you like?
I'll be very good.
Okay. Perfect.
Hi, everybody. And thank you, John and Louisa, for coming today. I also want to thank Alexia for her introductions and everybody who was involved in today's event. I'm delighted to be able to facilitate the discussion on your book, which I enjoyed. And I want to thank another person who is behind today's event, and that is Delaney Getz from the class of 2023, who's now working in San Diego and can't be with us in person. Delaney was a student in my introductory writing class, reading and writing autobiography, and with her classmates in the spring of 2023, when I asked them to research and propose any memoir or autobiography for the MIT Reads program, Delaney made a terrific argument in favor of MIT Reads bringing John and Louisa to campus to talk about mind and matter. So thank you to Delaney. I hope she's watching on Zoom. So to begin with, you've talked a little bit about how the book originated, and I wanted to ask you both. I read that, I know that you, Louisa, are a seasoned biographer, and so you're obviously bringing that to the project. And I read that you split the chapters between you for the most part, with Louisa, you writing the chapters about football, and John, the chapters about math. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about your process for writing?
Sure. Well, John, for the most part, left the football chapters to me, as you said, which was fun. You know, because we lived together, it was a pretty easy logistical process. Instead of having to sort of schedule time, we would be driving to friends' house for, a game, board night or dinner or whatever, and I would say, tell me about X, Y, or Z, and he'd tell me a little bit, and then I actually would do some also research a little bit, which was a fun project. And then the math, it was great. I got to learn a lot of math for this. So we actually had a chalkboard in our bedroom, and he would say like, okay, so this chapter is going to be, we're going to talk about proofs, and proofs by contradiction or whatever, and then teach me proof by contradiction or whatever, it was, and, take the lead on how to approach, what he was learning at certain times, and then also what concepts and how to present them to young people in a way that they would understand while also being digestible, and obviously that's his area. I'm also a sports writer by trade, so I could sort of handle the football kind of aspect and the biographical aspect a little bit more, but I don't come into this with any expertise. So, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I agree. The math portion is definitely where my focus was in this book. It's where I spent a lot of time. Where, we went back and forth, and Louisa was also quite involved in the math in terms of me trying to think about what is the right way to present some concept that will be enticing and interesting, but also true to a broad audience. And then Louisa was actually the perfect person to decide whether or not something actually stuck or something actually made sense. Because if we were working on something and it didn't make sense to Louisa, this was a sign that it had not yet been properly distilled, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, my role was sort of a translator in some sense, and also the reader, the stand-in for the reader. If I didn't understand something, it was probably not going to be right, and also it wasn't going to make sense. So.
Thank you for that. I want to say, on behalf of the other lecturers in writing, rhetoric, and professional communication, that we spend a lot of our time trying to help students figure out the best ways to talk about their STEM projects and their passion for science and engineering. And so I wonder if you could go a little bit further into that and tell us how you managed to break down math, which was, fairly complex math for this general and youth readership. Can you go into some of the strategies that you used to make that clear?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just a true fact of math that some areas of math are easier than others to bring to a broad audience. But sort of independent of what area of math or science you work in, there's usually almost always some connection to something concrete people can make sense of. The question is, what is that connection point? And how to, this is what we often say, like mathematicians say to each other, how to figure out the right amount of lying to do when you're, no. So this is, if you're an academic mathematician, you might think, I'm a mathematician, I meet another, math professor who works in a different area. If that person just shows me their math paper, shows me something very technical, I won't even understand what they're doing. If I show them the most technical version of what I'm doing, they won't understand what I'm doing. And oftentimes, the art of even giving a mathematical talk to colleagues is about taking whatever you're doing and simplifying it and hiding some complicating details and really trying to present something that shows the essence of what's going on without getting bogged down in the details and technicalities, and trying to find a way to present something that is really true at a very high level and sort of profound and concise, while at the same time trying to avoid going into certain details that can detract from that message. And it's an art, not only, I think, in technical mathematical writing for a broad audience, but actually in technical mathematical writing within the profession, talks within the profession. So I think that's actually something in math where I think every every mathematician, everyone sort of needs to have those types of skills.
Thank you. That's so interesting. And I'm tempted to ask if you encountered similar issues with explaining about the football part, you know, the intricacies of the NFL draft. And I know that you're a sports writer, Louisa, so I wondered if you have any insight on writing about the intricacies of sport to a broad audience.
I actually think that in some ways, I'm a storyteller in some sense, and stories can be flattening in some ways, as John was referring to. But if you can figure out a way to weave information and into like the flow of a story, then people tend to understand it better. And you can do that clearly with what the draft is and how it works and things like that by just kind of integrating John's, experience, that into John's experience. And the same way with the math. I mean, in some ways, including some like math history or things like that, like there are ways to sort of tell a story or use metaphor or connect it to things. I mean, I think I try to do that with sport too, so that, we are not so bold to say that we are like always lying, but there are ways to sort of connect some of the arcane, information around sport to experiences and to concepts that people can relate to easily because they experience them all the time.
Yeah. And I should say that in the book, there is actually no like hiding any math. There's no, yeah. Though, yeah, I would say mathematicians, we all lie a little bit in our talks. There's nothing is being hidden in the book. Yes.
Good to know, good to know. I wanted to ask you about a sentence early in the book when you write about your childhood and you talk about the puzzles that you did and you enjoyed. You say that all kids have a bit of a mathematician in them. Mm-hmm. And I was intrigued by that because as an educator and a parent, I'm interested to know what you feel that family members can do and educators can do to nurture that mathematician in small children, and why you think that a lot of children are put off or find obstacles. What are the obstacles that between the child who's solving problems and puzzles and the older kid who's put off by math?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is that, okay, what's my definition of math? And I would say math, broadly defined, though if you disagree with my definition, I'm not going to like fight you on it. I'm not going to die on this hill, but I would say math, broadly defined, is a set of tools and techniques that allow us to sort of understand and cope with the sort of like world and problems and things around us. And so when I think about, every little kid has some mathematician in them, every little kid has a sense of discovery, a sense of seeing something and wanting to understand why, a sense of wanting to, make sense of things. And I think that, oftentimes a math phobia can sort of start to appear when, let's say a kid grows up in a family where the parents have some, have some underlying fears or phobias about math, or it can come up when a kid is in school and they sometimes get bogged down in the algorithms and repetition of math rather than the thinking and the use of the tools that they learn to solve and sort of understand problems around them, to understand more versus less, to understand, the things that they see. And I think that can definitely contribute. And then also this sense of having to be a strong performer in math in school, to be a math person, that often, the hallmark of being a math person is like getting really good grades in your math class, and that it's not just something you can enjoy, and the act of solving problems can be enjoyable for you, even if you aren't one of the top students in the class, in the way that reading can be enjoyable for you, even if you're not one of the top English students, and something that you should do and should be a part of your life. And so those would be some of the first things that come to mind. I don't know if you...
I mean, I would say we have 2 small children, and so I'm around children all the time now. Not just my own, but their friends, and they seem to have varying degrees of aptitude at a young age. But all of them have an awareness of symmetry. They're all attracted to patterns. They all like to count. They all do sort of have this kind of intuitive and increasingly logical sense of more versus less and things like that. And it reminds me of, I have a friend who's a musician who told me that kids actually develop perfect pitch, at a young age, and that in some sense kids are like naturally musical, and some of those kids have higher ceilings than others, but you can sort of raise the floor for everyone if you reach them at the right moment and encourage those gifts that they naturally have. And so I think about that sometimes as I watch kids play and the way they order things. A lot of that seems like math to me. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, so you can say it better than I, but like it does seem that if you are able to recognize and celebrate and play in those ways, that and kids start to understand that as math and not just as like homework as math, then maybe there can be more a sense of kind of joy around it.
Thank you. That kind of brings me to my next question, which is both of you, from what I can tell from the book and also from a little research online, both have remarkable parents. And I know that, and you can certainly tell us a little bit about them. And I know from the book that your mom, who I met earlier, had some ideas about what you should study and where you should study. And as we all do often with our parents. And I find for MIT students, the question of pursuing their passions and going to college, they often find that there are a lot of parental expectations at play in that process, and they want to maintain a healthy, happy relationship with parents. But I'm really intrigued to hear more about how you manage that balance of pursuing your interests with alongside the expectations of your parents.
Yeah, so I'll go first, I suppose.
You can take
No,
this
I
whole
mean,
answer.
you can talk. I mean, you have a story to tell about this as well.
No, go ahead.
I started out in college majoring in aerospace engineering because my mom told me that's what I was going to major in. And I didn't know, I knew I liked math, I liked physics, I didn't know what I wanted to do or be. I knew I was going to play football at Penn State, and I said, okay, sure, this seems like a good enough major, whatever. And I started taking classes, and I always liked math and physics, so I just took all those classes first, like all the math and physics classes I needed to take. And I thought, I really like these even more than I liked them in high school. Like in college math, there was a real focus on understanding why. And this was a question that I always really cared about, as opposed to how. Like I've always been more of a why person than a how person. And I just started taking more math classes, and then I tried an engineering class to see how I liked it. And I just liked the math classes a lot more, and I just switched. And my mom did not think it was the best idea in the world, because my mom sort of thought, an aerospace engineer, NASA will always be hiring. What do you do with a math degree? But it ended up working out just fine. And I've always sort of carved my own path, found my own way, and so I didn't really have much hesitation switching my major. Yeah. Do you want to talk?
I think my parents had less expectation that I was going to say I was going to do what they said when I got to college. My dad was actually a writer. And my mom was actually like a little bit rivalrous, I think, with my dad about this. She was a lawyer, and she wanted me to be a lawyer. My dad also wanted me to be a lawyer, actually, because he correctly saw where the industry was going. And it wasn't NASA. It wasn't always going to be hiring. And I think he worried about my financial prospects. My mom, I think, wanted me to be a doctor, actually, originally. And they kept asking me when I was going to take chemistry when I got to college. I never took chemistry. I did think about becoming a lawyer, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, my writing path is a little bit of a different story, but yeah, it is similar in the sense that I found something that I was really passionate about, which was poetry and writing, and just it became clear that that was the direction I wanted to go.
Sure. So I want to go back to another topic that originally Delaney Getz wrote about in her review of the book. She wrote, "There is a lesson here about how letting go of something is not the same as failing. Urschel speaks to this towards the end of the book as he grapples with the decision to retire from the NFL, but he feels as though he's failing. But ultimately, he emphasizes that he isn't failing, he's just letting something go. This is Delaney's voice, this really resonated with me, and I think it's something that would be good for MIT students to hear. I think we often worry about failing. We may not want to drop a class or a club because we think it would be failing, when in reality, it's letting go." So John, you also mentioned in the book that it was football that taught you how to fail. And Louisa, I read that your most recent book is you were co-editing a book on losing in sports. So I think it seems like you both would have lots of interesting things to say about losing and letting go.
I'll let you start.
Just a couple of losers up here.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we actually were having this discussion last night.
Were we?
About failing. You were like, "I fail all the time in life."
Oh,
I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
"Do you?"
yeah,
And
yeah.
he was like,
No, that's
"Yeah,
true.
like every single day." And I
Yeah,
was prodding him because I was saying, "Oh, you mean you start a theorem and your conjecture doesn't work and you get sidetracked?" And he's like, "No, wait, I fail like in a basic way every single day, and like this today, I didn't get water from our son, and that was failing, But it is actually a helpful way, I think, of because sometimes we punish ourselves for our mistakes, when in fact, if you see them as kind of different lessons, you just learn from them and move on. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it is true. I forgot to refill the water, and he was a little thirsty, But the main point of this is that I would say, one, there's two questions here, I think. So let me separate them. First, this idea of failure versus stepping away versus redirecting. We're all busy people. And there are lots of things we want to do. There's lots of things we care about. And if you're doing something and it is not working, or you're doing something and you feel like the things you're doing does not fully match necessarily the things you believe in or how you think you should be investing your time, if you can, don't be afraid to redirect yourself, to make a shift. I mean, life's really too short to sort of like spend time doing things that don't fully match your current priorities, especially if you have the means to change them. For instance, if you're a student here, you're taking a class, you don't like it, it's not like you need it for your major, or it's never going to be offered again, and you're taking like 6 classes, you can let that class go. It's going to be okay. If you started a club, you were a part of a club, and you feel like, I'm getting so busy, but I should go because I feel this obligation. I started this. No, you have many classes to deal with. You have many responsibilities as an MIT student. You can let that club go. Your friends will understand. Like, I think it's okay to not be afraid of redirecting yourself towards what you think matters most to you and what you care most about. And then the second part of that question, this part about failure, I think it's important for each person, depending on their temperament and how they how they view themselves, how they view the challenges they face in the world, I think it's important to strive to succeed, strive to do well, strive to be successful, especially if that's something you really value, but recognize you are going to fail. You're going to fail early, you're going to fail often, you're going to have lots of little small failures, and you're also going to have some big ones too. And the point is that you shouldn't judge yourself by your failures, but by how you respond to them and the successes you have in the face of them. And so, when I think about myself doing mathematics or when I think about playing football, I have so many failures that I could list for you. I mean, just trying to do things and it not working, hoping to reach some goal and not getting there, over and over and over again. But it's through setting ambitious and lofty goals for yourself, for really, having a big vision about the things you think you can do, that even if you do fail, you're going to be pretty happy with where you end up. And I would say that, failure is something that's happened to me pretty often, but it's not a sign that something's gone wrong. It's a sign that I'm trying to do things that I really care about, that I'm very passionate about, that are ambitious. And when you do ambitious things, I think it's really important to get comfortable with failure, because these two things go hand in hand.
I spend a lot of time talking to athletes, and some of them are among the most successful athletes in the world, not just John. And something that they say to me over and over again is that failure is the best teacher. That often, when you win, they have trained themselves actually even to look at their failures in winning situations, but that actually it's those times that can really hurt, or those times when they feel maybe the worst about themselves, that teach them what they have to work on, and also teach them these incredible skills of resiliency. I mean, I've had coaches say to me actually that they are grateful, for painful losses. That's when people listen. Actually, that's when their players will really sit up and be open to adjusting, be open, and often those victories that follow losses are among the sweetest and most satisfying. So in some ways, there's a way to see failure as a kind of opportunity for feedback. So I struggle to approach it that way myself, I should say. In some ways, it actually separates, I think, some of the most successful from the me of the world, in their capacity to be resilient, and also to take what they can learn from those times of failure.
Thank you. That's so interesting. I want to ask you one more question, and then we're going to go to questions from our audience online and here. And I wanted to ask John a little bit about MIT. You at MIT, and how you came to really, I understand that you love it here.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could just walk us through how you became acquainted with MIT and what you're going to be doing next here.
Yeah, great question. So first of all, for grad school, MIT was pretty much my top choice. So I do mathematics, but the math I do is a little bit on the applied side, I would say. It's a sort of mix between pure and applied mathematics. And I felt like MIT math was actually the best math department in the world for me, in that, I don't know if any of you have spent much time in the math department, but it has this amazing mix of mathematicians in the broadest sense. So what would often be considered pure mathematics, applied mathematics, computer science, all existing together in one department and talking to each other. And that was something that I really valued when I was looking at graduate programs. I worked more on applied math, but I really viewed myself and my motivations for what I was doing as being sort of centrally a mathematician. And so that's why I wanted to go to grad school here. And I got here, and I was just absolutely floored by how amazing this place is. I mean, just it's hard to even describe being around all my fellow PhD students, people who are just so brilliant from all across the world, everyone working on something different and having, you know, these like amazing insights to share with each other. Everyone being so dedicated and passionate about their specific thing. It was really motivating to just, walk down the halls talking to different professors and all the amazing things that they've done and continue to do, to get to interact with undergrads who, I can tell you MIT undergrads, I'm convinced, are like undergrads at no other place. Like the fire and drive and ambition and just pure curiosity to just do whatever comes to their mind and they want to set out to do is it's just a really great environment. And I can say that I thoroughly enjoyed my time doing my PhD here, and this was my first choice for where I wanted to be a faculty member. So I'm glad I got to come back.
That's great. Well, we're very glad to have you. And thank you for taking my questions so far. And I would like to now invite people who would like to ask John and Louisa any questions to come to the mic. There's a mic over there towards my right side of the room. Sylvia will hand it to you.
Did you raise your hand?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking today. I just had a question as a student. How would you give advice for students that want to balance different career paths or passions, especially if they're very contrastingly different, like mathematics and sports?
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you that, okay, if someone tells you, you have like 3 or 4 different passions, and they say you can be world class at all these things, I think this is getting a little ahead of ourselves. I think there's a balance between being able to do many different things and being able to do many different things at a world-class level. And I can tell you, I was able to do 2 things at the same time. But this required a level of focus and time management where if you added, let's say, a 3rd thing at the same time, I don't think it personally would have been possible for me. I can tell you that, for instance, when I was a college football player and I'm a math major, I'm trying to learn all the math I can, and I'm also trying to be the most successful offensive lineman I can be, I structured my day in a way that put those priorities first. So when I was in college, I thought, what matters most to me? It's math, learning all the math I can, and being as good of a football player as I can be. And so what I did was that every single day I made sure my schedule was such that whatever I needed to do in math and football to be successful always came first. So whether it's trying to schedule my classes as early as possible, trying to schedule my weightlifting sessions, my treatment sessions, anything I could, I always front-loaded in my day so that I made sure I spent my early hours doing everything I needed to do in a given day to be as successful as possible in these 2 things. With the idea being that eventually, at the end of the day, 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or whatever, if I've done everything I need to do for those 2 things, now I can relax. Now I can, hang out with my friends. Now I can watch some TV or play a video game or go to some party or whatever it is. Now I can add something else to my plate, but always making sure that I got done what I needed to do for those 2 things first. And I think it's important for all of us, especially when you're a student, realize you only have so many hours in the day. There's only 24 of them. You should be getting at least 7 hours of sleep. And so recognize that you have a limited window of time and that you can't do everything and anything you want, and that the things that you're interested in, the things you want to do, make sure that your schedule allows it, and make sure that how you allocate your time matches what you're really passionate about, would be my advice. So.
Thank you. Do we have another question? From our audience here.
I have a question from the live webcast. An anonymous viewer asked, do most MIT PhD students get the sort of flexible study plan that you were able to use, splitting your time between the Ravens and campus?
Yeah. The answer is yes, they do. I got no flexible study plan. So I had the exact same PhD plan as all the other students, so mine was indeed exactly the same. So that meant, I mean, the one way in which I was lucky is I did have a fellowship that meant that I did not need to do any TA responsibilities in my first 3 years, which I was very grateful for. But other than that,
You had a spring start too. Is that normal?
that's a little different.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah, other than that, I had to take 3 classes a semester. I had to be a full-time student. Even in the fall when I was playing football, I would, hand in things via correspondence. I would make sure I was choosing classes where there was a textbook that they followed pretty closely, so I could just read the textbook and then do the PSET problems. I had to do my quals still on the same schedule. So I would say I received very little special treatment in terms of like what my PhD requirements were, what the schedule was, and what the requirements were in terms of course load per semester, even during semesters where it was in the fall and I was playing professional football. So, yeah.
There was a funny moment where the Ravens were sort of in playoff contention, and he had his quals scheduled for like early February, and it was like, you want to make the playoffs.
I wanted to make the playoffs.
You wanted to make the
I wanted to make
playoffs.
the playoffs. Yeah. Yeah. And then I like locked myself in,
Yeah.
like in my office for a month, just like prepping for my quals, catching up.
Did you find that there were a lot of football fans in the MIT mathematics department?
Not really, no. which I didn't mind. I enjoyed. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed reading this book a great deal. My question is about, MIT is sort of, it has an interesting place in the book because it's kind of like it's kind of like the candy store you arrive at the end. But I was really interested in the perspective and thoughts about like the MIT football team here and the sort of perspective you got from like watching that and I think having had, Division I is very different from Division III, and we are very proud of our athletics here, but there's a different culture around it. And I was interested in, from your perspective, in these sort of more professional ways of looking at the role that athletics really play for so many of our students here on campus.
Absolutely. So I can tell you during one of my off seasons, I actually got to spend a good amount of time with the football team. I trained with them. They would always let me use their facilities when I was around MIT. And one thing that I was always thoroughly impressed by was just how much they all loved the game. Like, you love playing football in high school. When when you're playing Division I college football at Penn State, yes, a lot of things are being asked of you that maybe aren't being asked of you when you're at MIT in terms of hours in a day, in terms of time, in terms of commitment, but you have this like natural payoff beyond football. You get to go out on Saturdays in the fall and play in front of like 110,000 fans. Football is inherently cool on the Penn State campus. And it's inherently it matters in this fundamental way in that community. And it's integral to the community. Whereas here, yes, we love supporting our student athletes. Yes, playing sports is a absolutely amazing thing to do as a young person. MIT football does not have that same place in MIT culture. It just doesn't. And the amazing thing is, still you have a group of guys who show up to practice every day, who work hard in the off season because they love the game, because they love playing football, they love hanging out with their teammates, they love all the things that go into it, none of which involve sort of like the glamour and the prestige. And there's something really special about that. And especially, you know, at that time I was playing in the league, it had been a while since I had played high school football, which, you know, when you sort of have a feeling, I'm not even sure it's even like, depends on what high school you go to. And I would say that, yeah, it was something that was just absolutely amazing to see. And also I can say that the culture around the MIT football team was so healthy and so reflective of the MIT community that it was really great for me to see, in the sense that, you know, suppose you're a football player. I mean, this was back then. Maybe the players now will say something different. If you have a big P set, if you have a bunch of P sets due and you need to miss practice, you just miss practice. You go get your P sets done. If you have a big exam you have that you need to study for, you go study for that. And nothing happens, and like everything's okay, and like there's a team culture that like allows that and recognizes that yes, you're here to do, you know, amazing things academically, and that you're actually a student athlete and the student part comes first, and that certainly what you're going to be doing after college is probably going to be involving your degree and not, you know, what you did on the football field. And so, yeah, so I can tell you that I'm like MIT football's biggest supporter. I think it's a great culture, and I think sport in general, whether it's a varsity sport, a club sport, or even just some sort of group activity, I think being a part of a club, being a part of a group bigger than yourself, I think it's really important for young people. Yeah. So.
Do we have another question from online?
Grab you afterwards.
Yeah, I have a question from Jay Lopez, who's asking, math and football were the two things you wanted to master. Despite that fact, I'm sure there were days where you would wake up and not want to work on certain aspects of those skills. What did your internal dialogue look like in those moments?
What are you laughing at? That's a good question. I'm not sure I ever had.
That's why I was laughing.
Yeah, I'm not sure I ever had an like, you just do it. Like, whether whether you feel like it or you don't, or you're not feeling well that day, you know, I love doing math. I love doing football. But when, at least for me, when I commit to saying I'm going to do this, that's my job. It's time for me to, you know, get up and do it, whether I feel good, whether I feel bad, no matter what, to really stay dedicated and stay motivated. And in that way, yeah, I don't think that sort of internal dialogue actually ever comes up. The idea being that I think, you know, if there's something you really want to get good at and something that you really value, I think viewing it as not at all a choice while you're doing it is really important. It's not a question of like, oh, do I feel like it or not? It's just like, there's actually no decision making involved because the decision is just made for you. Like, I find that if there's something that you really want to do and it's important to you and you view it as a daily decision, that just has to be so hard to have to every day decide, oh, I'm going to do this today. I'm going to do this today, as opposed to saying, no, there's just no choice in the matter. There's no getting out of this. There's no inner dialogue. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Do we have another question in the room?
Noah has a question.
Hi, John. What I found interesting about what you said earlier about how everyone has a sense of, logic. Everyone has a sense of, I've heard this about music also. Everyone has a sense of rhythm. Just to cut my question short, do you see parallels between communication with your ex-football players and communication with mathematicians, whether it's silent communication or through words, in terms of how people think? Because I assume on the football field, a lot of the communication is happening silent. You make eye contact, you kind of know what exactly the other player is about to do. Do you see similar parallels between being hyper-focused versus seeing the big picture?
It's they're very different cultures, and the ways and the norms of communication are very different. But I would say that, and also just the temperament is different. In football, you're saying things, you're doing things non-verbally, but you're also saying a lot. And in football, when you're saying these things or not saying these things, the stakes can be quite high. The stakes when you're on the football field are sort of your health, your teammates' health, and communicating properly and doing the right things and making sure everyone's on the same page. This is a really important thing with very serious consequences if you get it wrong. And so there's a level of sort of focus and precision there and a level of intensity, whereas talking with mathematicians, you're working on some proof, you have some idea, you're trying things out. The communication, I think, is much more laid back, much more open-ended, experimental. It's a little different. But I can say the two populations, I think, both outside their element, actually, in some ways might seem very different, but share a lot of common characteristics. I think anyone who gets very, very good at something inherently has built a lot of characteristics that are sort of shared across this entire population. This idea of having a work ethic and a drive towards something, the sense of passion about something. And I think that talking to most football players at a high level and most mathematicians at a high level, they sort of shared this.
Right. Do we have another question from online?
Do we have another question in the room?
Hi, yeah. So someone is curious. You talked a little bit in your intro about being sort of a young mathematician, and they're curious if what kind of puzzles you enjoyed as a child when you were fostering that love of mathematics.
Yeah, all sorts. So, I loved all sorts of things when I was a little kid. So when I was a kid, my mom first of all, she would buy me like standard things like Sudoku things, like Kuro puzzles, but also I would get like little Martin Gardner books, and I just enjoyed doing so many things. Or I would, when I was little, I would visit my dad, and my dad lived in St. Catharines. He lived in Canada, and he would always take me to his office. He would go do his Saturday rounds. And then afterwards, he would always take me to Chapters, which is a Canadian Barnes and Nobles. And he would sit in the cafe and work, and he would just let me roam anywhere I wanted it in the bookstore for hours and hours and hours on every second Saturday. And so I would just perch myself in the math section, and I would just be reading all these math books and chapters that many of which were far beyond what I should be reading or was capable of understanding. But I was like a kid in a candy shop, and just this sense of wonder and discovery is something that I think really had a profound impact on me. Yeah, it's kind of sad. I go to a bookstore now, and I look at the math section and I say, oh, I know that book, I read that book, I like that book, I don't like that book. But I remember when I was a kid, it was just like, it was the most amazing experience. And so those were the sorts of things that I remember from my childhood. Also, like every Friday night, my mom and I would do like game night, where we would play like Monopoly or Connect Four or whatever, quantitative game we wanted to play at the time. And that also, I think, like the gamifying of like quantitative reasoning was something that was also really good for me when I was a kid.
Great. Any more questions?
Hi. So as a student athlete, I'm aware of like the mental struggles of like stopping a sport you've like given everything to. So I'm curious, like, did you face this? And if so, how did you overcome like the struggle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, it was actually easier than a lot of my friends, mainly because the moment I stopped playing, I was so busy here that like something just filled all that time. Also, I had a small child, and so like things filled that time and that space so quickly that I never had moments to just sit and relax and think, man, I miss doing this, I miss doing that. Somehow I was just moving forward and constantly just like trying to get everything done and like keep everything handled, that I really didn't encounter it. And so I would say one thing is, when that time comes, you're going to lose something that's been a fundamental part of your life for probably many, many years, maybe a decade, maybe more, and that's going to be drastic. And probably the best thing you can do is make sure that that time doesn't just become emptiness, but make sure that you really fill it with something that's productive and active and that's doing something in a different direction. And I think that is probably the best piece of advice I can give. I can say a lot of my friends, some of my friends had a tough time leaving football. You spend, like a decade of your life doing the sport, spending, somewhere between like 2 to 4 hours a day on this every single day ever since you're little, and feeling like that's a part of your identity and who you are, and then all of a sudden it just disappears. This can be tough. And so I think not wrapping your sense of self into the things you do is really important, and then making sure that you really redirect that time towards something productive.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Cool. So from the webcast, someone asked, it's sort of a two-part question. With the advent of AI, how do you see applied maths fit in? And also they were wondering if there are any interesting projects that you're excited about in the short term.
Yeah, two great questions. I have a lot of math projects I'm like really excited about. Somehow I feel like I'm in a nice place where I have a bunch of problems I really want to solve that feel ambitious, and I have ideas. And so that's a good place to be as a mathematician. And so yeah, I think, over the next 3, 4, 5 years, I think I'm going to have my hands full and have no shortage of things that I want to do, though I won't be so bold as to name any of the problems I'm actually trying to solve. And then the second question, what was the second question?
AI.
Oh, AI.
Applied math.
I don't think so. I mean, ChatGPT is great and all, but it's very good at some things, but this is my personal non-expert opinion. I don't think it's replacing my job in the next decade. It can do some things really well. For instance, if I have some code and I need it to, change from one language to another, or if I'm building something and I'm feeling lazy and I want it to build the building blocks for me, and then I just sort of like edit it in post, I think it's really great at giving me a first start on something. I think if you give it math problems, it's hit and miss. I think it's Yeah, it's not quite there yet. But somehow, whenever you give it a math problem, it's very confident, even when it's like very wrong. And so for like MIT undergrad students, I would say, like, use it as a resource, but I would be cautious about like letting it do your job for you, because it can be very convincing to a non-expert eye about that it's doing what you're asking it to do and that it's doing it correctly and explaining it correctly. Yeah. So.
Thank you. Thank you for the great questions, and I'm going to pass it over to Alexia.
Thank you, John and Louisa and Louise. Let's please give them a round of applause. A wonderful conversation. And many thanks to all of you who joined us in person and virtually. For those who are here, we will be serving dinner, and John will be signing his amazing book along with Louisa, so we hope that you will stick around for both of those things. And thank you again, and this concludes our season for MIT Reads. Thank you so much, and have a really great evening, everybody.